Hello, my name is Naomi Colas, and today we are going to talk about being a new data steward and what that looks like for the Department of Education and reporting in the portal. So let me go ahead and get my presentation up here and we'll get going. This presentation can be found in our Workdays website, and I'll go ahead and show you some links as we go through it. It can be helpful as I'm talking to have it open on your end and click through some of the hyperlinks. We want you to utilize this presentation as something in the future that you utilize if you have questions. But please don't hesitate at any point, at any time, to email the NDE service desk, and we will be sure to answer any questions that you have. So to go ahead and get started here, what we're going to cover today for folks who are new data stewards, or let's say they've only been a data steward for a year or two, or even if they're a district administrator or a SPED director, this information is a very generic overview for many different types of systems. When I say systems, I mean districts or non-public schools. It does gear a little bit towards the public district side of things because public districts report more data to the state, but it's very applicable to Rural 18s, special purpose schools, and any entity out there who's reporting data to us. So we're going to talk about what kind of data is reported and who reports it. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of the NDE portal, which is where most data is submitted. Then we're going to talk about different parts of the portal. We're going to talk about data collections. We're going to talk about student data. That would, when you hear the word advisor, we're going to talk about staff data and how that's reported to the state. I'll show you how to subscribe to our bulletin, and then I'll give you the web link for the NDE website. We'll talk more about the service desk, and we'll leave you with a bunch of resources so you'll have a better grasp for all this stuff that you're reporting to the state. So kind of some of the first questions that you may have is when, let me get rid of this header here on my page. What is this data that you're submitting to the state? Why are you submitting it? And I think it's important to start the conversation with the fact that this data belongs to the district. It belongs to the schools, and you're submitting it to the Department of Education so it can be utilized for many various purposes. So some of the types of data that you'll submit are student data. There's both aggregate and student-specific level data. There's also program data around what you're doing to support the students in your schools. There's also staff data. It's used for accreditation, certification, that student-teacher connection. And we use the data for state and federal reporting, a lot of accountability, accreditation stuff, and it's collected for financial purposes in some places, or because of state statute, or because of a federal regulation. So this is just a few examples. There's a lot of different purposes out there. And if you ever have a question on why am I submitting this specific sort of data point to the state, please feel free to email the service desk. And if we don't know, we will get an answer for you. So then we talk about who reports the data. So I've mentioned it belongs to the data and it belongs to the school districts and the schools. It's important for each of the schools to develop a team that can work together to review and submit this data to the state, because it takes a team, right? Like one person being responsible for everything, it's a big weight on your shoulders, even for some of the smaller schools and entities who don't have to report as much data to the state. But a great team dynamic might include a formal data steward, which I'm hopeful this is the audience I'm speaking to today, a SPED director, a counselor, a principal, superintendent. Keep in mind, it's not the responsibility of just one person, whether that's the superintendent or the data steward, to report and review this data. So while the district administrator for the portal is typically the superintendent, and they're the ones who are going to do that final approval at the end, it does take a team to get all the data together. These, what we call collections in the portal, and I'll get to that point, but we collect this data at various times of year. There's several kind of key data periods, and one is in the fall, and it's usually September, October. And then another one is at the very end of the school year, and that's in May and June. So those are two real key important times of year where you'll hear that various collections are coming due or you have some statutory deadline. The other thing to keep in mind as we talk about this stuff is FERPA, and that's the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act that all districts should have training on. It's all about keeping your student data confidential, and it explains more about why not every single staff person at the district needs access to every single data point that you're submitting to the state. So there's a couple resources here for you, a presentation from our data conference in April, and then the website for the FERPA team at the federal agency level. So I've talked about the portal, and I'm sure most of you have already started an account and have one created, but just in case you haven't, this is the website here, and we always recommend that you bookmark it as a favorite. You'll register for your own portal account because each person has their own portal account. That account doesn't belong to a school. It's not you have add things that are related to a school, but that account belongs to a person. So when you leave a school district, you can take your account with you and add collections for a different school district. You don't need to create a second account. And then going back to that FERPA mentality, the confidentiality of data, we do not share our login IDs. We do not share our passwords because each portal account belongs to a person and they're meant for one person. It's important that when you're submitting data, that timestamp of who you are submitting it, who's clicking this button, who's submitting this number is accurate and reflective of the person actually doing the data submission. So in the portal, we call them tabs, and I'm going to go through several of these and explain what the various ones do. This help tab is available even if you don't have an account, even if you're not logged into the portal. And here you can find information about activation codes, which are how you add these various collections or applications to your account. There's some instructions on how to set up portal accounts. And then there's a really helpful document for those who are going to be in the role as portal district administrator. And that talks about who that person should be, what they're responsible for, and how they can manage the data of their school. The other tabs that we're going to talk about today are the data collections tab. And this is some collections that collect a lot of more aggregate data points. So we have the consolidated data collection within that, and then several other standalone collections that are very specific to one example would be non-public curriculum. And that's a collection where the non-public schools submit their course data to the state and they associate it with a teacher. So it's very specific to it's more aggregate in that way. The other tab is the student and staff and SSRS tab. And I think of this as more specific to people, whether it's reporting your staff data or whether it's reporting student data through advisor validation. This tab is going to contain the information more specific to an actual person. And then the other one that we mentioned here is the My Profile tab. And in here, you can update your email address in the portal, like I mentioned, if you change school districts, and you can also update your phone number. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability for you to change a first or a last name, but you can contact the service desk and we'll help you out if you need there. So I mentioned a little bit, the portal requires these activation codes. What are these? Well, each collection or application is going to require an activation code for access. And a lot of collections, sometimes they have multiple activation codes because not only do you need this base level access, but you also need some additional security levels on top of it. And so you'll add multiple activation codes in order to get that broader viewpoint of the data. Advisor validation is a collection that has that. And then there's other collections that are just one-time codes. You add them, you've got the collection added, you can complete that data every year. You're good to go. So it just varies per collection. The portal district administrator is the person who's managing this access for your school. And typically this is the superintendent at a public district, or at a non-public, you'll have it be a principal or a head teacher. The portal district administrator is the one who is handing out activation codes because they are the person at your school who knows who should have access to what data. The NDE, the service desk, we don't know who's appropriate. Should this person get SPED access? We don't know because we don't know what your role is at the school. So just remember, if you email us and ask us for a code, we're not going to be able to give it to you. You're going to need to contact your portal district administrator. So once you're in either the data collections or the student and staff NSSRS tab, and this screenshot here is from the data collections tab, you'll see the items broken out to two sections. You have the top section, which is available. And this is collections that you've already added to your account that you have access to. Now you can add access, you can remove access, but that blue hyperlink of any collection name means that you have access to it. The bottom section is the online section, and that's the area where you can go and find a collection that you need to add to your portal account. So when you got an activation code from your portal district administrator, you're going to go into the online section and you're going to find the add button, click that, and then put your code in. The other thing on this page, and I actually don't have it on the slide here, but I'll just mention, if something says available in the status, that means the collection's open. You can go in there and either view reports or view data that's been submitted. But if it says closed or internal, that means that the districts no longer have access to update anything in there. But if you ever have questions on that, you can email the service desk. And then we spent a little time talking about the portal, but we have some exciting news, and that's in December, we're gonna have a new portal and it's coming soon. So it's gonna be important to kind of keep your eye on things for updates because there's some cool changes. These activation codes kind of make things challenging for everybody. We're getting rid of those, right? If you're at a public district, you'll be able to log in through your SSO system. So you won't have to have a password for this system, have a password for this system. You'll have your single sign-on and then you'll be good. And then we're also, and I think this is going to be a real win too, there'll be the ability for districts to have a proxy administrator. That means that there's someone in addition to the superintendent who can also approve access for various folks at the district. But like I said, more information coming soon. Look to your bulletin. I'll tell you how to subscribe to that later on. And we'll get you trained up on the new one. I think it's going to be pretty nifty. Okay, so one of the tabs we talked about is the data collections tab. So I'm going to dig into a few specific sort of collections that are within it. Here's a few listed. One collection, which makes the word collection is everywhere, is the consolidated data collections. We refer to this a lot as the CDC. Another collection you may have in there is the Counselor and Library Media Not Endorsed collection. This is a collection that identifies any counselors or library specialists who aren't currently endorsed, but are working towards their endorsement. And this collection allows the district to show NDE the progress towards that program. We've got another example here, teacher vacancy survey, and this is gathering information related to teacher shortages at the school, and there's a ton of others. Most of the collections and data collections are kind of what we call standalone. They're individual collections where it's a very specific thing that's being asked to be submitted. So let's dig into the CDC a little bit. So when you've got this collection added to your account, you're going to open it and see all these names. And that's because the CDC is a collection of collections. So when you get in there, you'll have your home button. You'll be able to see your name here where it says user ID, and it'll display your current district and the school year. If for some reason you have to support multiple schools or multiple districts, you can change that information over here by selecting your alternate district. So there are some schools who have to fill out, like, let's say 5 of these collections for 2 different schools. And so they'll have to go through each one and then change the district. Similar to how the portal was set up, you have the open collections and you have the closed collections. So the top section is going to be the ones that are open, and the bottom section is going to be the ones that you don't have access to. So I guess I got a little ahead of myself, but that's what this screenshot here is showing you too. At the very top of the page too, there are some other buttons, and I think people kind of miss these, but I know this click to view previous data has been really helpful for some schools because they want to see what was submitted the year prior because they weren't there. Let's say they're new and they just started, and they want to look and see what was submitted the year prior to give them a better gauge of what they should submit this year. There's also an instructions button and a calendar button up there. Now, when we talk about activation codes, depending on which of the collections in the CDC you need access to, you're going to want a very specific activation code. So if you're the person who does all the staff reporting for your school, you'll probably want the code that's called staff. But if you're the superintendent, you're going to need to add the approver code because you're going to need to approve every single one of these collections. I'd say the all gives access to every single collection in the CDC, and the general are probably the two codes that will give a district user the greatest scope of access. And then if you really need to narrow it in, you can pick one of these other ones. MIPS access has to be added to anybody's account because it's very private information, so it requires its own special activation code. So if you're a superintendent and you think, oh, I've added the approver one, I'm good. If you need to see access to the MIPS, you're going to have to add that activation code as well. So for every collection in the CDC, there's instructions at the top of the collection page. And I've also included a link here to our CDC website that's available outside of the portal. Most of the student level student data collected in these collections is aggregate, so it's not specific to a student name. And pretty much every collection has to be completed, submitted, and then approved. And that approval, as I've mentioned, has to be done by the portal district administrator, who is typically the superintendent. So with the new portal I mentioned, the CDC, it's going away. So no more use of the word collections. Most of these applications are going to be standalone. And some of those have actually already moved outside of the CDC. So when you go to that CDC website, you'll see information as we kind of transition all of these collections, and we'll try to keep everybody up to date on the ones that have been created separately outside of the CDC, because like I said, we've started some of that now. Okay, I'm not going to dig into too many of the other collections in the data collections tab. We're going to move on to the student and staff NSSRS one because this gets into a little bit more nitty gritty. But if, again, I'm going to say this over and over. If you ever have any questions, please email the service desk, nde.servicedesk@nebraska.gov. Our job is to help you with any and all of this. So please don't hesitate to ask us any questions you may have. All right, so the student and staff NSSRS tab. This is the one where I talked about it has very specific people data. So we've got the advisor person ID collection, we've got advisor validation, NDE staff ID, NSSRS validation, which is related to staff reporting, and then staff reporting. So every single one of these collections helps you report very specific student and very specific staff data to the state. And we're going to go through most of these. So advisor, it's actually an acronym, which is why it's ER here. A lot of people can have a tendency to try and spell it the right way. And it means Advanced Data Views, Improving Student Educational Response. So currently we have two advisor-related collections. One's called Advisor Person ID, where schools can create, update, and manage student IDs. And then the other one is advisor validation, which is where student data from our public districts and special purpose schools is submitted to the state for analysis. So let's talk about advisor person ID first. Every single student, whether you're a public, a non-public, a special purpose school, should have their person ID number updated every year. And the best time to do that is at the very beginning of the school year when you're going through all that registration and enrollment process. And that information, the reason why is because in this collection, you're basically saying student A is now an 11th grader and they're at this school. And that kind of tracks a little bit of student information if this kiddo is going to change districts or schools. The information can be entered online, which is like a direct update per ID, or schools can do a file upload. Can't find a number, you found a duplicate, or you found a shared ID, contact the service desk. We really want to try to avoid creating duplicate IDs for students because it makes their reporting kind of confusing. Or we've had it where two students are actually sharing one ID because in the near match process, which is part of this updating, an ID was accidentally grabbed or reported for one student when it actually belonged to another because they had such similar names and similar dates of birth. So it totally happens. Just notify the service desk as soon as you find something, and we'll help kind of break through that nitty gritty and figure out how to fix this, the problem. So here's a screenshot of person ID and the enter online. So this is where you could be creating a brand new ID for a kindergartner that's never been enrolled in a Nebraska school, and you're going to need to put all this information in there for them. The other format, which is better if you're just doing your once a year and you're doing all your student population, is the upload file methodology. And we do have some instructions on our advisor resources site. And I do want to caveat that some student information systems, like your Power Schools, Infinite Campuses, they have downloadable files that match Person ID system. And so that can be really helpful too. If you just download something from your SIS, then you can upload it right away in here. Next, we'll talk a little bit about advisor validation. And I should mention, before we dig into this, I should mention this presentation is meant to be geared towards all audiences. So we're going to spend some time a little bit in each of the collections, whether or not you have to do them because you're a public or a non-public. But pretty much the real key ones, like advisor validation, we have work days dedicated to them. And so if you spend a lot of time in this collection and a lot of time working on that, come to a work day and let us help you further learn about each of these specific collections. We had some for staff reporting, those will keep going on. So we've got them throughout the year and resources for most of the collections. All right, so advisor validation. This takes information from the student information system, which is then sent by the district. Like you send it from the SIS, where advisor doesn't go into your SIS and grab it. Your SIS sends it to advisor, and it's some student information systems call it synced, some say published, but it takes this information, puts it in an advisor. We have several different SIS vendors, including SRS, which is actually not a SIS vendor because they're more specific to special education data. All right, so when you're going to add this collection to your account, you might need to add multiple activation codes. So the basic level access is district. If you're just doing some generic sort of data support, that might be sufficient for your needs. But if you're the SPED director, you're going to definitely need to add a second code for special education. And if you're the data steward, you're going to need all these codes because you're going to need to help with discipline data, free and reduced lunch data, special education, all of it. So again, contact your portal district administrator if you need additional access. And I'll kind of show you what some of the screens look like if you don't have the right access. So once the district has set information into advisor validation, NDE does some analysis of it, and we show you some errors or some warnings. We provide you with a whole slew of reports to review to make sure that the data you're submitting tells the story of what's happening at your school district. And then there's some tools within the collection, that we call lookups. So you could look up a student's enrollment information. You could look up the student details, even the programs, we have information on it. This link here takes you to a guide specific to the advisor validation collection. So that can be helpful for a new person who just added the collection to their account. This is what the homepage looks like. And there's two main menus, and they basically show you the same thing. So if you click on the hamburger menu in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see errors, verification reports, lookups. If you look on the left-hand side, you're going to see a very similar list of menus. When you open up that hamburger menu, if you want to, there is a button that you can click that says contact, and that actually auto-populates an email to advisorhelp@nebraskacloud.org. And that is an email address that goes straight to the service desk, and you can ask us any questions about Advisor. You can ask us questions about any of the collections, but this one specifically about Advisor. So typically the way most districts handle submitting their data through advisor validation is they send everything from the SIS, then they come to advisor validation and they check out their errors and their warnings because they want to make sure that they fix all that before they start looking at the reports. So to view your errors on the home page, it will display it right away. But if you're in a different screen, you can always go to that menu, select errors, and then click on review errors, and it'll display your errors specific to the data domain. So in the screenshot, you've got errors for courses, special education, demographics. If for some reason any of these lines weren't blue, let's say, for example, the special education, that means you can't click through them. That means you're probably missing some access and need to add another activation code to your account. Once you click through these individual domains here, you'll see a screen that breaks out the errors or warnings by number. So to view the students that are in error or warning, you can click on the numbers over here in the error count column or the numbers in the archive warning information count. And again, if any of this is black and it's not blue and you can't click through it, it's probably because of the activation codes and you need to add additional access to your account. So these are the different kinds of errors. There's critical, regular, there's warnings, and there's informational notices. These critical ones, prioritize those. It is likely you need to fix these. Regular errors, probably need to fix these too, but what you're reporting may be the truth, and maybe you just need to live with the error. You can comment these if you want to add. Warnings are more of a, hey, check this out. We think this data point looks a little funky, but you may leave it there because that's really what's happening. Or, yeah, it may be funky data and you want to go in and fix it. And then finally, the informational notices are even lighter than the warnings, where it's just kind of like FYI. So likely a lot of times with these last few ones, you want to put a comment in there. You can even archive some of these so you don't see them every time you log into the system. If you have any questions about the errors, we've started writing articles at our help site here about each specific error number. So let me show you this previous screen. So like here, you might find an article for error number 286 or 546. So if you go to this help site here, you can click through and view individual articles for each of those errors. And that can be helpful when you're trying to resolve those. All right, once you've resolved the error, you want to reprocess it. You want to make sure, did I fix the problem? Typically, you have to go back to your student information system, update the data there, resend it into Advisor, and once you've done that, you want to reprocess your errors. You can do that by each domain. So this screenshot is about special education, or on that home page, over here, there's a reprocess errors button, and you can actually reprocess every single one of your errors as well if you want. Now, here's an example of clicking through into a specific error, and you clicked the number, and then it displays, this is kind of what it displays. So you've got a description underneath the header here, and typically that description tells you how to fix the error. Do you want to read through that? And then you've got a report here of the students who are in the error. And what can be helpful is you can export this information to a PDF file or to an Excel, and maybe you can share that with someone who can then help you fix the error that you've got going on. Or they can research the student and say, oh yeah, you're right, that's wrong. And Let me update SRS and then we'll resend the data and see if that fixes it. A tool that can be helpful as you're kind of researching your errors, and even after you've been looking at your reports, are our lookups. And so those are over here in the left-hand menu under lookups. There's the enrollment lookup by ID, and that displays one kiddo's enrollment and their entire public and special purpose history, regardless of which district. It lists all of them. That I think can be really helpful. There's also student lookup by ID. So this is very specific to one student for one district for one school year. So you have to break down into each of those, but then you can look up every data point specific to that student for that school year. So I want to spend a little time just kind of talking about data elements in Advisor, and these are all these data points. But a lot of times people will be looking at Advisor validation and they're like, that student's first name says Joe, but the kid's name is Jonathan. And so the information for these kiddos' first, last, and date of birth is coming from Advisor person ID into Advisor validation. So in that case, you'd have to go to person ID and fix it so it said Jonathan, so that it would import into Advisor validation. Each one of these data elements, first name, last name, date of birth, has a description and a lot more information specific to it in Advisor data elements. So whenever a ticket comes into the service desk, one of the first things I do is open up data elements. Because if someone's asking me what a SPED setting is, I need to go look in there and see what all the different codes are and what all their descriptions are. And it's so helpful because it details each of those data points in very specific terms that can help you maybe even evaluate a situation. So that's a really helpful resource if you click through this link. All right, so once you've gone through, looked at your errors, warnings, fixed the ones you could, then you want to start looking at your verification reports. In your left-hand menu, you've got your verification reports and students. And this is just a short screenshot, but there's all sorts of other categories in here. Each of these is one header, and there are reports within it. So if you look, let's say this is general and miscellaneous, you've got the report names here. You've got the descriptions, and then this review period, and that tells you, okay, I should review this report at the year-end data collection, or I should review this report during the fall data collection. And I'm going to say it again. If you go to click through any of these reports and they're not blue and they're black and you can't click through them, probably need to add an additional activation code. So if you have any questions when you try to get into this and you're like, why can't I click through that? Email the service desk and we'll help you out. And then after all that's done, your district administrator needs to sign off for each of the 3 collection periods within Advisor. You have year-end, follow-up, and fall. So there's some instructions here if you have a new superintendent that they might find helpful on how to sign off each of the collections. Here's a lot of what we talked about at this Advisor resources page. We've got a calendar there, data elements. This guidance called Who Reports What can be really helpful if you have a challenging student reporting situation and it's really unique and you need to understand like who's responsible for reporting what data points about this kid. We've got course code information, the Advisor validation and district admin sign-off guidance that I talked about. There's some additional program information like early childhood codes at this website. You've got your person ID instructions. And something I've had a request for recently is folks want to see what other school district names and their numbers are. That can be really helpful too. All right, so we're going to change and we're going to go over to staff. So we talked about students, now we're going to talk about staff reporting. Staff reporting has a couple different due dates. We've got a statutory due date of September 15th for public and non-publics. We've got a fall deadline of October 31st. And we have an end of year deadline, June 30th. And what's interesting about this collection is it's open all year long. These are just various ending dates of which you want to make sure to review your staff reporting, make updates as needed, throughout each of these different periods. We take data from staff reporting and we start to utilize it in these various systems after each of these deadlines. So if you miss a deadline, yes, first two. If you miss one of the first two deadlines, yes, you can change that information. It may impact reports that we're sending out to different entities. There is a on the help site here, we've got a workday page, and there's some staff reporting workdays coming up. And there's also, if you miss those, a presentation and a recording specific to staff reporting, and that can be really helpful as you dig into that collection. So here's the staff resources page. This has the manual for every year in it. And when we talk about staff reporting data, what are those data points we're collecting? We're collecting demographics. So we're talking name, date of birth, gender, ethnicity, and we're also collecting position assignment information. What role are they in? Are they a teacher? Are they a principal? What day did they start? If they're a substitute, how many days did they work? So each year when we open up the staff reporting collection, you're going to have to add a new collection to your account because each year is its own collection. So you'll have to add an activation code or obtain one and add that collection to your account every year. And when you open it up, all the staff listed are in error. We've taken data from last year, imported it into this year, and you're going to see everybody listed, but several key data points are missing because we expect that the assignment date, which is the start date, is different every year because it is. It's a different year. It's not 2023, it's now 2024. So you will need to update each individual person, and that can be done on an individual basis, person by person, or you can utilize a file upload system. So if you're going to do online entry, this is the individual update. You're going to go through each of the fields and ensure that information is correct, even the data pre-populated from previous years, or you're going to make the updates that are needed in order to make the data go through. And you're going to do that for each staff person. The other option is to download files, make updates to them, and then re-upload them. And I will say, I think some of the student information systems have some of these files that you can download from your SIS, which can be helpful too. What's important to note though is there's two different files to upload. One's for demographics and one's for position assignment. Once you download that information, that's fine. But the second you upload your demographics file, every data point that was previously in there is erased. So make sure you have both of your files updated and ready to go before you go actually in there and upload them. So staff reporting itself is kind of a three-step process. So one, you're going to go into your staff reporting collection, as we talk about. It's going to auto-load most of the information, and you're going to update individually, or you're going to do a file download. There's also some errors in staff reporting. So make sure after you've done your updates or after you've done your file upload to go back in there and make sure that all those errors are cleared out for your staff. Staff that are not in error will appear green. Staff in error will appear red. Once you've done that, you're going to go to a second totally separate collection. It's called NSSRS validation. And once you add this collection to your account, you have it every year moving forward. But when you do add it, we recommend adding this activation code for the role staff data steward, because that gives you the staff information to review and analyze. So once you log into there, there's some errors, possibly, maybe you don't have any errors, but you might have some errors. We want you to review the errors in NSSRS validation. And to fix some of those, sometimes you have to go back to the staff reporting collection, update the information there, and then come back into NSSRS validation and reprocess those errors. Third, after all that, there's some reports in NSSRS validation, and you're going to want to review those throughout the year. So they're the two that I think, the one that I think is really, really helpful is the current personnel report, because that lists everybody that you reported in staff reporting, and it's a big old report of every single person and what they're reported at. But there's also several other reports here that can be helpful as you're reviewing your staff data. So that was a very brief overview of staff reporting. What I would say is definitely go to that presentation from the other workday, from the staff reporting workday, and review that. NDE Staff ID is another collection, totally separate, and that's a collection where staff IDs are managed. You can create brand new ones for people who are potentially not certified, like maybe an instructional para, but it's also a place to view existing IDs. In most cases, the certification system, which is called TEACH, creates new IDs based on Social Security number. So if the Social Security number doesn't exist in NDE Staff ID, the TEACH system is going to create a new staff ID for someone. We've had a lot of cases recently where people who were paras and have been for several years, they go and apply for their certificate, and all of a sudden they have a second ID because that first ID that was created for them doesn't have their Social Security number in there. So we really recommend getting that Social Security number in there if you're going to create any new IDs. All right, so let's give you more resources here. The NDE Bulletin. This is a subscribe system. You have to go in and subscribe to it. So go to this website. You'll see the little envelope icon. Click on that. And you can select all and receive every single bulletin item that comes out, or you can choose specific to your type of entity. So you could choose public, or you could choose non-public, or you could choose ESU. And then you also can select how often you receive the updates. We really recommend right away because these come out on Mondays or Wednesdays or Fridays, any day of the week. And if you select weekly digest, you're only going to get them once a week. And that just makes some of these updates kind of missed a little bit, because if something gets sent on Friday and you don't get it till Thursday, that's a week delay. If your email address changes, you've got to resubscribe. We don't know. Like I said, this is a subscribe system, so you have to subscribe to receive it. So if you have a new email address, we don't know that. The NDE website has a wealth of information as well. So I think it's just important to note this. It can be a little challenging to search, but this hamburger menu in the upper right-hand corner here, it opens up and you can see all different programs and different entities that you can look into and search on. And I think what's important here to note is too, this has information for not only districts and schools, but also for the general public. So this might be helpful for some of the parents at your schools too, to help understand, why do they keep asking me about this digital equity thing? Like, why are they asking me about that? And then the parents can go in here and see some of the efforts that are being made towards that. And then your biggest resource, of course, is the NDE service desk. Kim, Stacy, and I are happy to help you as often as you need us. That's our job. So email us here, and it will automatically create a ticket, and we will answer those in the order received. I will caveat with, if your question is specific to your student information system and you send us a screenshot of that, we don't know all the different SIS systems. So contact your SIS support and then touch base with us, and we'll talk you through advisor validation. But if you're looking at an Infinite Campus screen, boy, that's like Greek to me. All right, so we do have some more upcoming workdays. We're going to have some advisor ones. We've had some staff ones. We're going to have some more. This workday website is really, really helpful. And even if you can't make the workdays, all the recordings from those workdays will be on this website. So even if it's been 6 months since the new Data Steward website, we're going to have this recording there available for you so you can look at it then. The last thing I would mention is that we do have a data conference every year. We brought that back in 2024 after COVID, and we'll have it again in 2025 in April. The dates are TBD. And then we've got a data webinar on September 11th coming soon. So go to this website here and you can register for it, and we'll have lots of updates for you specific to a lot of the collections that we've talked about today. And that's it. I really appreciate and thank you for the time that you've stuck it out and listened to me talk this whole time. But again, please email the service desk if you have any questions. We're always happy to help. And I don't know if I said it earlier, but my name's Naomi Colas, Stacy Pauling, Kim Powell. We are your service desk team, and we are pleased to help you whenever and however often we can. So thank you very much.